US-Israel war with Iran now in its sixth week, a ceasefire proposal on the table, and a president who says he doesn't know whether he is winding down or escalating. While Pakistan's army chief worked through the night, while ceasefire frameworks were exchanged in the dark, and while mediators from 3 continents scrambled to pull 2 sides back from an abyss, Donald Trump stood before cameras this afternoon saying, "I don't know. It depends what they do." I am Zunaira Azhar and you're watching Decode, where we define and analyze the stories shaping our world. Tonight, 3 things: the performance and the press conference, what was actually said, what it means, and what it doesn't. The strike that no one fully explains. Israel hits Iran's largest petrochemical facility and the world's largest gas field takes another blow. And Pakistan's overnight diplomacy, a foreign office that won't comment, and an army chief who wants peace, barely slept. Let's begin. In a blunt, high-stakes briefing, Donald Trump signaled he is prepared to escalate strikes on strategic energy infrastructure, framing it as a decisive leverage rather than prolonged conflict, while the CIA director warned that intelligence points to a rapidly shifting threat environment with limited room for miscalculation. Meanwhile, Pete Hegseth reinforced a hardline posture, emphasizing readiness and deterrence, underscoring that the U.S. is positioning for speed, precision, and dominance if the situation crosses red lines. U.S. President Donald Trump stood at the White House podium, Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane on one side, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on the other. And a reporter asked him directly, "Are you winding down this war or escalating it?" His answer, "I don't know. It depends what they do." I don't know. It depends what they do. This comment by Donald Trump leads me to 2 assumptions. 1, the most powerful military command in the world, in the middle of an active war that has already killed over 3,400 people across the region, and the commander-in-chief does not know whether he is winding down or escalating. 2, there is a version of this that this is honest and even strategic, maybe for some, a leader who genuinely does not telegraph his next move because ambiguity is a tool. And in certain negotiating contexts, keeping the other side uncertain is exactly the right posture. But there is a difference between deliberate ambiguity and visible confusion. And what we saw today was, at best, a press conference built around performance and celebration of one incident in an enlarged conflict, not clarity. Here is what we do know from today's presser, based on reporting by major news outlets like NPR, NBC, CBS, and Al Jazeera. Trump confirmed the 8 p.m. Tuesday deadline for Iran to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. He said Iran's response to the ceasefire proposal conveyed through Pakistan was a significant step, but not good enough. He said oil prices might stay high into the summer. He said Iranians want freedom and would willingly suffer more bombing to get it. And when asked directly whether hitting Iran's power plants and bridges would constitute a war crime, he said, and I quote, "No, I hope I don't have to do it." This press conference was formally scheduled around the rescue of 2 downed U.S. aviators, the pilot and the backseater of an F-15E fighter jet shot down over Iran. Trump, praising his generals, and Pete Hegseth called them incredible. So the rescue became a press conference, and the press conference became a threat in the middle of efforts for a ceasefire. Behind the scenes, Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir was reportedly still on the phone with J.D. Vance, to Steve Witkoff, to Iranian Foreign Minister, trying to hold together a framework that the White House simultaneously called not good enough, and one of many ideas. Let's look at the scale of what is actually happening, because pressers like these may make us lose track of a parallel and more pressing reality. Brent crude at $109 a barrel. The average price of gasoline has hit $4 a gallon, a number Trump himself confirmed. CNN's own polling shows Trump's Republican base is cracking. Strong approval among Republicans dropped from 52% in January to 43% last week. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a fifth of world's seaborne oil passes in peacetime, has been effectively closed for 6 weeks. Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia all activated their air defense systems on Monday alone. So a war with a global economic tail, and the president does not want to say if he's winding it down or escalating it. Now, the rescue. I want to return to it because I think how it was used to tell stories, that is really important. The rescue of 2 American airmen is a real event, yes. It required real bravery, yes. Real planning, real risk. No one is disputing that, but the decision to anchor a White House press conference on it, while simultaneously setting a new infrastructure strike deadline, while a 45-day ceasefire proposal is on the table, while the death toll climbs past 3,400 is a choice. It is a framing decision, and framing decisions in the middle of a war are not neutral. What the press conference communicated, regardless of intent, was this: we are in control, we are brave, and we are still the ones setting the terms, even when we don't know what we are doing next. Democratic legislators, according to Al Jazeera, were unsparing in their response. Congresswomen Yasmin Ansari called for invoking the 25th Amendment. Senator Alyssa Slotkin, a former CIA officer, said attacking civilian infrastructure would violate the Geneva Conventions and the Pentagon's own law of war manual. Senator Bernie Sanders, he called it the ravings of dangerous and mentally unbalanced individual. Both parties watching the same press conference reaching opposite conclusions. That in itself tells you something about where American politics is right now, and how much this war has become a domestic as well as a foreign policy story in US. Asked about war crimes today, Trump said Iran's regime had killed over 45,000 people in the last month. They're animals, and we have to stop them. He also said it would be a war crime to allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. These arguments are anything but legal answers to the question of whether targeting civilian power infrastructure constitutes a war crime. They are political answers with no moral strings attached to it. So, the 8 a.m. Tuesday deadline ends tonight. The ceasefire proposal drafted by Pakistan, backed by Egypt and Turkey, is on the table. Iran wants a permanent end to this war with guarantees against future attack. The White House says it hasn't signed off, and the president says he doesn't know. The Strait is still closed, oil market is still rattled, and the performance of resolution, the press conference, the rescue, the deadlines is doing what performances do. It is filling the screen while the actual outcome remains unwritten. That answer might come tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern. And to discuss this, we have with us Dr. Ali K. Chishti, who is a policy expert and has an avid eye for what's happening geopolitically at the moment. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for joining us.
Welcome.
Trump yesterday said that he doesn't know whether he's winding down or escalating, and said it depends what they do. Is that a genuine strategic openness, or is it evidence that Washington does not have a clear end game and that the pressure tactics are now substituting for a defined policy?
So if you just look at Trump's press conference yesterday, I think they do have a defined goal, to be honest. And if you look at the American political objectives, that has already been met in Iran, which was the change of regime. Now, of course, there is the Iranian reaction of attacking Gulf as a leverage, of course, stopping Strait of Hormuz. So when President Trump comes on to say that, of course, they would stop, of course, they look at the Iranian reaction. That's true, because the ongoing negotiations, from what I know, is that, of course, the bottleneck are the Iranian IRCG, because they want clear understanding, or, of course, confirmation or a guarantee that this has to be stopped permanently, or of what we call the execution of war, or the execution of war pact has to be signed before the Iranians to stop. So so we need to understand the escalation ladder, of course, is been dominated by Iranians, of course, not the Americans at the moment. So there's action and then reaction, and then action and reaction. This is a spiral thing which is going on.
Yeah.
So if you look at President Trump's the whole press conference yesterday, it was more to do with leveraging. This is a classical American leverage. They try to take, of course, if you don't listen to us or you don't do this, we'll bomb you. If you do not do this, we'll actually take this action. So was President Trump taking those, calling, of course, praising their own military, and of course their whole military and the administration praising Trump. Of course, that's what he liked, but it was more to do with telling Iranians directly and indirectly how superior the Americans are, and of course they're ready to finish the job in Iran. Yes.
Right. So the press conference was formally anchored, let's put it this way, to the rescue of 2 US aviators. Yes, a genuine military success, but it also contained new infrastructural threats and a new deadline. How do you read the decision to combine those two things in a single event, because the negotiations are ongoing? And what signal does that send to Tehran and to the mediators as well, who are trying to close a deal?
Well, I don't. To be honest, if Trump speaks less, I think it'd be good for negotiations. As we saw Trump giving out operational details just yesterday, he was stopped by the American journalists because he speaks too much at times. I didn't think the president should be giving out operational details, nor taking that line, of course, which would affect the negotiations directly, because sometimes the statements from him are too harsh, and of course the Iranians take it to the heart, and of course, and why not? They have been bombed. Day before yesterday, 50 of the IRCG top commanders were taken out by the Americans in Israeli joint strikes in Tehran. So you see, it does affect the talks, and of course back channel are negotiated from the Pakistanis. So there is, of course, we need to understand it's President Trump or the American or the Israeli actions in Iran, which is unjust, to be honest. And of course the Iranian reaction on Gulf both embarrass the Pakistanis, who are the mediators. And so it's pretty tough for Pakistan. It's pretty tough for Field Marshal Asim Munir and his team, of course, which is led by the NSA, to talk on these, and of course to cool down anger from both sides, especially from the Iranian side, because every time they're close to deal, something happens. And the spoiler, to be honest, are the Israelis.
Is that deliberate?
Yeah,
because killing negotiators constantly, bombing infrastructure, which is energy infrastructure, constantly, do you think this is deliberate?
Absolutely. So it was Netanyahu who called to Trump, which is on record, telling him to delay the negotiations. And this is where my concern is. When President Trump gave out these a waiver of about 10 days, or of course 48 hours, not to attack critical infrastructure, we see Israelis going and attacking water desalination plants and power plants in Iran. And Iran, of course, takes out this on Gulf. So this, of course. So we see, and I always call Israel as the original sinner in this, of course, who led this campaign. And somehow in media we do not talk about, we talk about the Americans and Iranis, and somehow we do not talk about the Israelis, who are the original sinners in this. They are, of course, the problem, of course, and the original sinner, which is trying to sabotage these peace talks by not only, of course, going on and attacking critical infrastructures, when, of course, there is some sort of a understanding, but, of course, taking out Ali Lajarani, for example, who was a peacemaker, of course, negotiators. At a time, and of course we came to an extent where Pakistan had to tell the Americans to take out 2 Iranian top officials from the kill list, and tell the Israelis clearly, of course, this is there was a red line has to be placed on this, or of course that there won't be any end to this war. Yes.
While we clearly know what Israelis are hovering towards, Trump is someone who can make or break everything. Look at his language. That is what worries me, that while US is that card that has the most leverage, and he is telling the reporters yesterday that Iranians would willingly suffer more bombing to gain freedom and that they're animals, what impact do these specific words have on the diplomatic track and that leverage that I'm talking about, in particularly the Pakistan's ability to present itself as a credible go-between the two countries, which were not talking to each other previously? Where is this leverage of US?
I think there is, of course, a leverage of Americans. Of course, they're too big of part to ignore. I think Iranians see Trump as not somebody who is a hypocrite. They see, of course, as a man who is there in his entirety. And of course, this is the man who dealing with good, bad, or evil. We could always talk about from the Iranian perspective. Pakistan understands the same, and of course, the world understands as president, a U.S. president who is there. He's undiplomatic, he's unapologetic. At times,
but transactional as well, Dr. Chishti. We thought he's transactional as well, which is good.
Which is good. And I see that, of course, a lot of people who are at the power corridors understand President Trump and, of course, takes that strategy. Pakistan being one understands President Trump and, of course, plays the game where, of course, he likes it. And, of course, this is how to deal with Trump, and we've somehow cracked it. And I think we've been telling the Iranians to do the same. And, of course, I'm sure there will be a deal, which we're very close to a deal, I'm told. And of course, again, of course, fingers crossed. But, of course, if Islamabad Accord goes through, which I understand would go through, there is initial agreement by, of course, both sides. There would be, of course, a physical meeting which would happen in Islamabad or, of course, anywhere which would actually stop this. So, you see, we need to understand President Trump. Of course, he's not a hypocrite. Of course, he's there as it is. I think dealing with them is easier than, let's suppose, President Obama or even George W. Bush, because, they would say something and, of course, do something else. It's easier to deal with Trump. And I think the only bottleneck here, again, are apparently the Israelis in the spoiler Mecca. And we should not discount this vicious attack by Iranian IRCG on Arab nations, especially to Saudi Arabia. There was an attack yesterday, which was vicious, which was condemned by Pakistan today. My information today is that Pakistani negotiators did take this out in Iran, and of course, this is not seen as something normal or seen as a sabotage by people within Iran.
Right.
Somehow.
To take the debate back to US for a moment, because yesterday's presser is all over, the screens right now. The ICRC, over 100 legal scholars and now members of the US Senate have all raised war crimes concerns over the infrastructure threats. Trump totally dismissed those concerns directly. At what point does that legal and international pressure becomes a constraint on what Washington can actually do, rather than a rhetorical point that gets swept away?
I think, let's be fair, there is no morality. There is no international law which has been, accepted by the highest power, which is the Americans at the moment, or for the fact Israelis. So, yes, there are concerns.
But with approaching midterm elections, aren't they worried about it?
I don't think there is a concern. And this is where, of course, I think we need to understand whether Trump is, of course, is a desperate for deal. And, of course, we see Vice President, the American Vice President, who was, of course, opposed to the war originally, is leading these talks as a negotiator. So both wants this to finish. They understand, of course, this would affect their midterm election if there is no win, of course. And that is why, they need some sort of a win or a face saving at the moment. And I personally believe all sides did get a face saving. And one is, of course, the Americans who have actually said the regime has changed, somehow. But for the Iranians, the status quo remains the same. And, of course, they have survived. One of the reasons why Iranians are not closing the deal, because they understand with what has happened in the Gulf, what they did to the Gulf, and what is happening, they would not survive economically post-war. So they want an economic deal, incentives by the Americans. And that is, of course, the bottleneck, nothing else. And the Israelis has a face saving where they have somehow converted all Gulf against Iran as well for the long time to come. So you see, this has been there for all three sides, and this is where would it affect the American midterm elections? That needs to be seen at the end of what kind of negotiated settlement comes out. But it looks like, of course, that it'd be tough for President Trump and his team.
Polling results are showing that Trump's approval is slipping, even among Republican strongholds, and his own party is privately worried about the midterm costs. So how much of what we are seeing from Washington right now is shaped by the domestic political timing, and does that dynamic make a deal more or less likely before the deadline tonight?
Yes, I think, I always maintained throughout from last 10, 12 days, looking at this from Middle East as well, it's not the Americans or the Pakistanis or the Iranians or the Israelis would stop this war, but it's the economics of this war. It's become too expensive. For everyone, from Europe to America. I was just talking to somebody in New Zealand just yesterday, and he said only 16 days of fuel reserves are left in New Zealand. So, this is the world is contracting. There's enormous pressure, of course, on the US, by the Gulf, in the Gulf, and of course on Iranians themselves to stop this war because of the economics. Do remember, of course, when Strait of Hormuz is stopped, it actually stops the Iranian trade as well. It actually affects Iran as a country economically too. It has about $460 billion worth of GDP. It's contracting. So that is why, of course, they're looking for some sort of a waiver for the Americans. For Americans, they've become too selfish. They do not understand the world's concern. They have the fuel coming out from Venezuela, or they're pumping it out from the US. They have ample fuel, but it's affecting Europe. There's no gas in Europe, of course.
I mean, it's being said that the consumer has no identity, whether it's sitting in the North Pole or wherever. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali K. Chishti, for your insight. What we watched today was a performance, something staged, structured, and designed to communicate a specific thing to a specific audience. But the world outside that press conference domain does not run only on performance. While Trump was at the podium, Israel was in the air. While the president was talking about bravery and deadlines, bombs were falling on the world's largest natural gas field. A strike that has nothing to do with Trump's stated red lines and everything to do with the military campaign that appears to be running on its own logic entirely. This is what we decode next. A short break, and we'll be back. Yesterday, as ceasefire proposals were being exchanged and diplomats were working through the night, Israel deliberately struck South Paris natural gas field. South Paris is the world's largest natural gas field shared between Iran and Qatar. It is central to Iran's electricity production and critical to its 93 million people's daily energy supply. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, confirmed the operation, describing the targeted facility as responsible for roughly 50% of Iran's entire petrochemical output. He stated that the plant is no longer functioning. Combined with last week's attack on Iran's second largest petrochemical site, according to CNN and the Jerusalem Post, approximately 85% of Iran's total petrochemical production is now offline. Israel defense ministers called it a severe economic blow worth tens of billions of dollars. He added, "We will continue to hunt them down one by one." An IDF spokesperson added that Iran will receive no immunity even as diplomatic talks continue. In the same 24-hour period in which Pakistan's army chief was on the phone all night trying to broker a ceasefire deal, Israel was striking the infrastructure that Iran depends on for revenue, electricity, and industrial capacity. 2 senior IRGC commanders were also killed in Monday's strike. Major General Majid Khademi, the intelligence chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, was killed. A man who, according to the reports at the start of the war, had been overseeing possible back-channel contacts. The leader of the Quds Force Covert Operation Unit, Asghar Bakri, was also killed. Iran's response was immediate. Missiles hit the northern Israeli city of Haifa, where 4 members of one family were found dead in the rubble of a residential building. Iran targeted energy infrastructure across Gulf Arab states, Kuwait, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia all activated air defenses. Tehran warned that if attacks on civilian targets continue, its retaliation will be, according to Iranian state media, much more devastating and widespread. Now, here is what makes this particular strike more than its immediate military impact. Trump had previously said, after Israel's first strike on South Paris in March, that such an attack would not be repeated unless Iran targets Qatar's energy infrastructure. He initially claimed the US knew nothing about that first strike, but Axios later reported Washington had approved it. Yesterday's strike happened while a ceasefire proposal drafted by Pakistan and backed by Egypt and Turkey were literally in transit between the capitals. The White House said it was one of many ideas and that Trump had not signed off. The IDF said Iran gets no immunity during talks. This is the structural problem that no amount of press conference management can paper over. The US and Israel are not always running coordinated messaging on when to strike and when to pause. Or, if they are coordinating, the coordination produces strikes that actively undermine diplomatic windows. And the cost of this is not abstract. Brent crude at $109, global energy markets in sustained disruption. The European Union has advised citizens to prepare for a prolonged energy shortages. Iraq is watching its own crude export capacity with anxiety. Every country that imports energy from the Gulf, and that includes most of Asia, most of Europe, most of Africa, is absorbing the economic shockwave of a war being fought with no clear exit timeline or an honest intention on it. There is a phrase that keeps coming up in the coverage of this war, that the military campaign has its own logic. What that means in practice is this: even when diplomats are talking, the planes keep flying. Even when ceasefire proposals are in transit, the missiles keep landing. And even strikes that lands during a diplomatic window makes the next window harder to open. Hence, the South Paris strike yesterday was a deliberate, strategic choice to keep dismantling Iran's economic infrastructure, even while a deal was supposedly within reach. This tells us that Israel's war is not just to stop Iran's nuclear program or reopen the Strait, but to continue to fundamentally degrade Iran's capacity in terms of economy, military, institutional, or the point where any future Iranian government cannot function or operate as it has been. This is a different objective than what Trump's press conference suggested. And the gap between those two objectives is exactly where the ceasefire proposal is likely to get lost. Let's get an Iranian perspective on this development. We have Mr. Fawad Izadi with us. He's an associate professor at the Department of American Studies in the University of Tehran. Thank you, Mr. Fawad, for joining us. So Israel has struck once again South Paris, the world's largest gas field, while a ceasefire proposal was actively in transit between capitals. IDF spokespeople says openly that Iran gets no immunity even during talks. Is this a breakdown in US-Israeli coordination, or is this a strategy to keep striking until Iran's capacity is so degraded that any deal is signed from a position of total weakness?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I don't think Israelis and Americans are interested in peace. Sometimes they talk about ceasefire, but we remember what they mean by ceasefire. They have had a ceasefire in Gaza, and since the ceasefire, they have killed more than 1,000 Palestinians. So ceasefire in American-Israeli definition means that they can talk about ceasefire and they can strike the other side at will anytime they want. They are not serious about reaching peace. There was a diplomatic solution available before the war. You might have seen the interview of the Omani foreign minister with the American television, CBS News.
Yeah.
He actually went to Washington to avoid war, and he said an agreement was available within 24 hours, and the Americans started the war just 24 hours after that.
True.
We had the former National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, saying that the Iranian offer was quite extensive, and Witkoff and Kushner did not understand what Iran was telling them. So this regime in US and Israel, they are not interested in peace. They have killed more than 2,000 civilians. They're hitting infrastructure, and they're not stopping.
Right. Two senior IRGC commanders were also killed yesterday, and this is continuing, including the intelligence chief. These are not battlefield kills. We all know they are targeted assassinations. These are targeted assassinations of officials who may have been involved in back-channel contact. What does it mean for diplomacy when the people on the other side of the back-channel keep getting killed?
It means they are not interested in diplomacy. When Trump acknowledged that we are killing the people that we were talking to. In the history of diplomacy, you don't have this type of action that you kill the other side, the representatives of the other side, and at the same time talk about making a deal. So no one takes Trump seriously when he talks about ceasefire or having a deal, because they are actually killing the people who are supposed to be doing the talking. And I don't think anyone in the rest of the world would take him seriously when he talks about these things.
85% of Iran's petrochemical output is now reportedly offline. This is not just a military figure, it is an economic figure that of course affects Iran's electricity grid and its 93 million people. At what point does the scale of infrastructure destruction make a genuine negotiated settlement harder, not easier to achieve? If this keeps on happening, do you think that any effort for ceasefire is worth it?
You know, Iran uses gas to generate electricity. So when they hit the gas facilities, that would affect electricity production. And the more they engage in these type of activities, Iranian officials realize that they don't have much to lose, because they have damaged the Iranian infrastructure extensively. And the result is that they will do the same to the other side. We have a lot of American companies in countries that have given bases to the United States. And these bases are being used to attack Iran. You don't have to believe the analysis of an Iranian professor. You can read the Wall Street Journal. The other day they had pictures of American refueling tankers being hit by Iran in a Saudi airbase, not an American airbase in Saudi Arabia, a Saudi airbase. These countries, unfortunately, have been part of this illegal war on Iran from the first day. We had on the second day of the attacks, Kuwaitis saying that they shot 3 American planes by mistake.
Yeah.
How would you be able to do that if they're using Kuwaiti airspace? And they were claiming that they are not allowing Americans to use their airspace, but they were. So this means that the American assets, American companies in these countries will be legitimate target for Iranian missiles.
I'll keep on the South Paras part for a while before I jump to what is Iran saying at the moment. Trump initially said that South Paras field would not be struck again. He said he knew nothing about the first strike. Reporting later said Washington approved it. How much of the gap between what Washington says and what Israel does is genuine misalignment, or how much of it is deliberate deniability built into the structure of the alliance?
You know, they are working as a team. They are basically dividing the attacks that they want to engage in. Trump also talks about taking over Iranian oil. He talks about changing Iran's borders. And last night, he said that the U.S. will level tolls on ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz, because he says that we won the war, so we get to level tolls on ships. We are dealing with the Epstein class. They like to kill little Iranian girls. They did it on the first day of war, 165 little school children. And they like to rape little American girls. And they are on a rampage. Iran is fighting for Iran. Iran is fighting for countries like Pakistan. The Americans and Israelis don't like strong Muslim countries. They are thinking about and planning about engaging countries like Turkey, Pakistan after they're done with Iran, if they're able to get away with what they want to do to Iran. And they want to use the oil and gas resources in this part of the world to put pressure on countries like China. This is what the U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham said.
Yeah. So Iran has promised a more devastating and widespread response if the civilian targets are hit again and again. Its retaliation already includes Gulf state energy infrastructure, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar into a wider regional destabilization. I wonder, who is it going to favor? Who's going to benefit from it other than Israel? What's happening right now?
Yes, they have designed this illegal war against Iran to favor Israel. They want to have Israel dominate this part of the world. And the Israeli government, Netanyahu, is talking about Greater Israel. Greater Israel includes Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. They have already taken over parts of Syria and Lebanon. And the hope that Iran had was that these countries realize that Iran is not looking to take over their territory. Mm-hmm. Israel is. And instead of helping the Israeli-American illegal attacks on Iran, the hope was at least they stay neutral. And they are not. So this is a misery that Israelis and Americans have brought to this region in order to have an Israeli hegemony. And unfortunately, these countries are not realizing what's good for them.
Point really nicely made. Thank you so much, Professor Fouad Izzadi from the University of Tehran. The fact that it is the region that is suffering, who is benefiting from it, I think these are the core questions. If you answer these, you'll get to know who is benefiting the most. The strikes are real, the diplomacy is also real, and both are happening simultaneously in what can only be described as a race between the military campaign and the peace proposal. And the peace proposal appears to be struggling hard for peace, which brings us to the country that is right now the sole formal communication channel between Washington and Tehran. The country whose army chief spent the night on the phone and the country's foreign office today ceased to comment. Pakistan. And what tonight's deadline means for Islamabad Accord. Stay with us as we decode that next. As per Reuters, Axios, Al Jazeera, Pakistan Today, and multiple regional sources, overnight Sunday into Monday, Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir was in continuous contact, described by one source as all night long, with three people: U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. The informally called the Islamabad Accord. It is a two-phase proposal. Phase 1, an immediate ceasefire and reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Phase 2, 15 to 20 days of negotiations towards a comprehensive settlement with final in-person talks to be held in Islamabad. Pakistan, according to multiple sources, is the sole communication channel currently operative between the two sides. When reporters asked Pakistan's Foreign Office spokesperson Tahir Andrabi about this yesterday, said, "We do not comment as that the peace process is ongoing." Al Jazeera's correspondent in Pakistan described the scene inside official circles as frantic diplomacy. One Pakistani official cited by Al Jazeera described the challenge this way: "It is a schoolboy brawl that they are dealing with. It is egos that they have to manage, and it is also a sea of distrust over which they have to build bridges." Let's lay out the three structural problems that are keeping this exit from war closed. The first is the asymmetry of what each side calls an unacceptable outcome. Washington wants a temporary ceasefire that reopens the Strait, while Tehran wants a permanent end to the war with security guarantees. These are definitely not compatible timelines in the first place. The second is that the military campaign is not pausing, even for the diplomacy. The IDF said Iran gets no immunity during talks. If the military campaign continues at full intensity during diplomatic windows, those windows will keep closing before anyone can step through them. The third, and this is the one I find most consequential, is that Pakistan's position as mediator is structurally compromised due to its close partnership with China in the eyes of Washington. As tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, the deadline expires, what might unfold is anybody's guess. But let's ask our guest about it. And to discuss this, we have a defense analyst with us, Major General retired Zahid Mahmood. Thank you so much, General Zahid, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Pakistan is described as the sole communication channel between Washington and Tehran, and its army chief is working through the night to deliver this framework. Yet, Iran has rejected the temporary framing of the ceasefire and submitted a 10-point counter-proposal. Now, Trump calls it a significant step, but not good enough. Is there a version of these two positions that is actually bridgeable in your opinion?
Of course, Zunaira, we need to understand that every conflict has to end at diplomatic table, and every conflict has to come out with good outcomes. As of now, I think all three warring factions, it is Israel, United States, and even Iran, they have reached their tipping point. I don't know how much military will alter this situation, how it can worsen the situation. But I'm not expecting that this will alter a situation in anybody's favor. If Iran today, they are thinking that strategically they are at a better place, I think this is the best time to go for an off-ramp. And if President Trump, who is claiming again and again that he has won the war, they have completed their objective, then what war is waiting for? Why he's going for the energy and other installations? I think more conflict will bring more players inside this war, and things will be more complicated and complex, may not be in anybody's control. As of today, as you have very rightly said, that it's the Pakistani card along with the friends plus China. Probably this is the best exit card available to both Iran and United States, and of course through United States to Israel as well. They must utilize it purposefully.
The Foreign Office declines to confirm, and for obvious reasons. I understand that there is an existence of a proposal. Field Marshal Asif Muni's role is confirmed through various sources. Why is Pakistan operating with this level of official silence, in your opinion?
I think the war is at a very, very critical stage, and considering nowadays the way this narrative building, the way this media is being used, Pakistan military leadership is very clear. It is, and Pakistani political leadership as well. This negotiation and whole this dialogue process and connectivity is taking place through very limited number of people, to be very honest. It is led by, of course, Field Marshal Asif Muni, and then they are avoiding the speculations. So, sometimes this media spoils the whole thing. My apologies, I'm talking at a media, but this is a fact,
No, but this is happening in real time. It's happening in real time.
Yes, it's happening. I mean, I want to say that they're very careful, because this conflict is an extremely serious conflict. I think at least in our lifetime, this is the biggest conflict which we have experienced and we have seen. And it is impacting every individual on this universe. So it's not an ordinary
Trump
conflict.
has now, General Zahid, missed at least 2 previous deadlines for escalation. He has threatened Iran with hell, obliteration, and now complete demolition. If the 8 p.m. deadline tonight passes without action again for a third time, what does that do to his credibility as a negotiating force, someone who is very much part of this conflict? And does it make a deal more or less likely in the medium term?
I think this is a catch-22. But I personally am, to be very honest, I am extremely worried that the way he spoke yesterday, though the confusion and complexities attached to his talks, and still that miscalculation for the future. You don't adopt such hubris approach before application of any military or a military strategy. You don't declare on the media that this is what we are going to do. Military strategy is all about surprises. Secondly, the political or the policy strategy which is flowing from the policy of a state, that has to be a forward-looking, not based on the previous events. Even the events of the war should not be dictating the future trends. So you have to move forward to achieve your objectives. But here we are seeing a mix of past and future as well. But he's threatening. If he is threatening, it means that his military objectives have not been completed. So once the military objectives have not been completed, it means that he wants to create a little more dangerous situation or a power position of strength he wants to achieve through the military means for a better negotiation. And if this time passes and this emboldens Iran, it is equally dangerous. If Iran think that they are at a very effective strategic position as of now, and they can dictate terms, it is not happening. They won't be able to dictate their terms also. I think both will be miscalculating if they they go further with escalation, or they go at the upper escalatory ladders. Because if Iran goes to upper escalatory ladder, what will happen? That they will expand the war horizontally inside the GCC countries. So even Americans, they quit this war without any negotiations, without any reaching to some certain agreement with Iran. Then what? Then there'll be conflict between the GCC countries and Iran if they continue.
Isn't it already there? Isn't it already there?
It is already there, but it will be more dangerous. Till now, countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and especially Saudi Arabia, they are showing restraint because of Pakistan. Zunaira, let me share this news with you.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yes, it it is because of Pakistan that they showed this restraint. That's why this morning attack on Saudi Arabian energy sites, this is not acceptable. This is extremely dangerous. It means that there are few spoilers or hardliners inside Iranian policy makers also. So they will create a very extremely dangerous situation in this region.
Right. So probably we have to wait for tonight's timeline to see where this goes. Thank you so much, Major General Zahid Mahmood, for joining us. An accord named after a city, a ceasefire drafted in the dark, and a foreign office that doesn't comment. This is what the exit from this war looks like right now. Fragile, deniable, and built on a foundation of overnight peace calls and political calculations that none of the parties will fully own in public. The deadline is tonight. Tonight, we began at Decode with a performance. A press conference built on bravery, wrapped around threats that legal experts say cross into war crime territory. We moved to a strike on the world's largest gas fields in the middle of a diplomatic window. And we ended with an accord named after a city that is trying to hold two sides together across a sea of distrust under a deadline that expires in hours. Today's thread is this: the gap between what is being said and what is being done has never been wider. Trump says he doesn't know if he's escalating. Israel says there is no immunity during talks, and Iran says it won't accept pressure while its gas fields burn. Someone will have to close that gap. The question is whether they do it with a deal or with a strike. Tonight's answer will shape this question. I am Zunaira Azhar, and this was tonight's Decode. Good night.